Please join me in welcoming Will. How is everybody?
Yeah.
Good.
Everybody good? Okay. Now, I'm not sure because you're already saying I'm an excellent public speaker. You haven't even heard me public speak yet, so. Yes, I did. You have a great
I
story.
was saying I was incredibly nervous in front of the camera and everything, so we'll see how we go. So look, this talk tonight's going to be a bit different. I gave a bit of a test for it a little while back at another meetup, and I see at least two people here that were there at that one. It's changed a little bit. I learned a little bit, and I've changed it a bit. But it's a bit of a different thing for me because it's a lot more personal. And it's kind of a coming to terms with something that I struggled with for years. Something I struggled with that's actually like a part of me. Now I'm not going to get too serious now, okay? But it is a bit different. So it's a bit different for me. So I guess let me start with a little bit about me. So I originally come from Charleston, South Carolina. It's known as the Holy City. Lots of old churches by American standards, which is about the same as Australian standards. It's a coastal town, so it's right here off the East Coast, right where that big bad hurricane currently is, right about there. Although it's looking way nicer to us than it is to the Bahamas, so I'm very pleased about that. But it's a water town, so it's real low lying. It's called the Low Country. There's I think delta. It's actually salt marsh, but it's kind of like a river delta. It's the confluence of 4 different rivers that hit into a harbor. And I actually was lucky enough to grow up on a little island off the coast. So an island called Sullivan's Island. It's a teeny tiny little island. Think North Stratty to Brisbane, like that sort of relationship, although scaled down because Charleston's a much smaller city than Brisbane. And I guess growing up on that island, a couple things happened that kind of set the course for where I would go in my career. First of all, we had some Apple IIcs, so I'm dating myself here totally, I'm okay with that. Some Apple IIcs back in the 80s at school, so kind of set the course for an interest in computers, specifically, $4,000 laptops that I've still am hooked on to this day. But also, it's a water town. So I had my first boat about 10 years before I had my first car. So I had my own boat, it's a power boat, little tiller steer thing, that I had whenever I was about 8 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 18, which is later than you can get it in the States because it's a tiny little island. You can ride a bike everywhere. Why bother, right? There's no point. The boat's more important. So, as I kind of moved forward through my life, I kind of built my CV, which Chris mentioned, Enterprise Agile coach at DHS at the moment, was at Tabcorp before that, TATS Group as a coach before that, a lot of project management, account direction, and for a long time prior to moving to Australia, I owned and managed my own business, which was originally designing websites and then later building them. So think by websites, think like animated GIFs and stuff back in the late 90s. Yeah, okay, so that style stuff, coding in HTML. And then moving on, it became more marketing automation platforms and stuff like that, some more modern sort of things. So whenever I manage my own business, I kind of look, this talk tonight is I'm not going to go hardcore into agile theory, okay? So don't get scared. But I did start using agile. I did agile with my business. It solved my pain. It allowed me to have better visibility in what was going on. That's the only thing I really, that's why I did it. But then as I went on, I kind of carried it through. It's a continuous thread through my career. In that now I do talk about the theory and things like that, and what makes a high-performing team and how high-performing teams can fit together to scale these modern and contemporary work practices throughout a large organization, so on and so forth. But this right here only actually tells half the story. Because if we talk about, a curriculum vitae that's Latin for course for life, if this is my course for life, it's only half the story. There's a whole other side of the story. So here, this would be the rest of my actual CV. So I built boats. I've captained those boats. Those boats have been prawn trawlers. We call them shrimp boats in America, and yes, that's exactly like Bubba Gump. It's the same thing. That sort of thing. Yeah. I was more the Captain Dan, I think. But anyway, I also am still a co-owner of a seafood business. I'm a very silent partner these days because I'm about 10,000 miles away from that business. But all back through my teenage years, I was mates on boats. Doing everything from charter fishing, so going out and catching like tuna and marlin and stuff like that, to oystering and clamming and the more commercial side of fishing. Now, this whole side of my CV, I never really talked about much, especially never owned my business. This is what I did other than work. I made money doing it, but in my mind, there was no real relation between the two things. And I was very serious about my business, and I'm very passionate about my career now still, but I'm also very passionate about this stuff as well. But used to keep the two very separate. Until recently. So until I started putting this talk together, this is me articulating the relationship between the two. But it's really whenever I became a coach and started to truly, I guess prior to becoming a coach, but since I've moved to Australia, really truly started to understand the concepts of contemporary and modern work practices to the point where you've read Stranger in a Strange Land, I've grokked them, if you will. And I got to that point through abstracting this to those concepts. So that's what I want to explore tonight. But it's not just about me, although as much as I'd like to think it is. I'd like to actually give you something to take away that you can use as well. But let's get into the fishing side of things. So that's me. That's me working on that's the Henrietta, I think, the Miss Henrietta. All shrimp boats are Miss this or Miss that, generally speaking. So that's me. That's about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, right there. And so why did I have this second part of my career, or second side of my work life? So initially, this is prior to me owning my own business. I was a graphic designer. That's what I originally went to school for. And I like to surf as well and travel. That's what I like to do. And so I started doing freelance graphic design, like I was gig economy, 20 years before the gig economy. But I didn't quite make enough money doing it. So I realized that if whenever I was home, I could re-up my funds, make enough money to travel. So that's kind of what got me into it. And what we first started doing is oystering, so gathering up oysters. Not actually prawn trawlers, we'll get there in a second. But oystering is seasonal work, so it only happens a few months out of the year. And in Charleston, the oysters actually come in clusters. So they are all attached together like this, not like the single oysters that you get here. And it is incredible. Oh, it's awfully dark. That's a boat right there, if you can't tell. It's incredibly hard work. So it's absolute back-breaking. And you are bent over all day. You're carrying these huge buckets full of essentially rocks with razor blades on them, is essentially what that plays out like. Incredibly hard work. And whenever we first started our first day, we were so stoked. We got a boat. This was the Betty Seaworthy. The Betty Seaworthy. Get it? Anyway, that's what we named her. And we went out in our boat. It was not a new boat at all. It was very rickety. But we went out in the boat, and we got enough oysters to, between my brother-in-law and I, he's now my brother-in-law, but then he was just a mate. We got enough money between us to buy a Coca-Cola, maybe? Something, like not even to pay for the petrol. And it was so incredibly hard to get the $6 or whatever it was that we got. And then we got made fun of, so this is up here at the fish house where you go sell your catch sort of thing. And they absolutely made fun of us, because they were, and they didn't think we'd last. But we were lucky. We were lucky, and then we had this fella Stephen. He grew up on the water his whole life. He kind of showed us how to do this stuff. He showed us how to actually, work hard, but work, smarter and harder. But that still wasn't really enough. What we had to do is we had to start innovating through both how we worked and the business models of the work that we were doing to make it viable. So again, we you know, there's heaps of work involved. The process to get work, this is where the oysters grow. They actually grow wild, so it's different from here, but they grow wild. You get them from here, you fill up this bucket, you carry this bucket to that boat, you repeat that process about 20 times. Then you drive this boat around to the boat landing, load all of those baskets up into a truck, drive that truck up to the fish house, load the baskets out of the truck at the fish house, hose them down, bag them up again, put them in the cooler, then you got to try and sell them. So that's kind of the process. So what we started doing, we said, well, we need to get better at process to make this work. So we started doing this. We started videotaping ourselves. And so this is kind of what it looks like. This is only the fish house part. That's me on the right there. And we took these videos of ourselves doing this work. This is us cleaning the oysters. And we figured at this point, this is where we were spending the most time, and there was the most, well, I mean, I have a word for it now, the most waste in our process. At the time, I called it something else. So we took these videos, we set them up, and we'd actually watch them, and we would you know, look for where we were. You know, what's that? That's waiting right there. If you think about our lean waste, I'm just standing there, you know, or you know, wasted human potential. Anyway, we would watch these and we would come up with new ways to do it. So, you know, what I now know that is value. If you want to see the whole video, I'll show it to you later. But I now know that's value stream mapping. You know, it's also Gemba. It's also Genshi Jimbutsu. If you think about your lean. Your Taiichi Ono, like the original lean Toyota way. This is essentially what we were doing, because we actually would whiteboard what we saw. No, I didn't know anything about lean at this point. I don't think I'd started my business yet. So, but we were essentially doing this. The other thing with commercial fishermen, so commercial fishermen are generally a dodgy bunch, right? And it was, you know, there's people that are out there policing the waters and making sure you only catch what you're supposed to and you stay within your limits and this, that, and the other. And it was like everybody had the attitude of, you know, let's keep them as far away from us as we can, and we'll only talk to them when and if we have to. And generally that involves a ticket, like you're getting booked for something because you've done something wrong. So we actually, you know, as part of, like, you know, we said, okay. We identified that as what a lot of people did. It was a big pain point for a lot of people. We said, well, why don't let's go talk to them. We'll go talk to these people. And we actually made friends with them. They're actually really nice people. But we partnered with them so that we could better understand the laws, as well as what their interpretation of the law was. And then that has transitioned now to where we're actually working with them to create new legislation. So that sounds a lot like shift left. Sounds a lot like DevOps. We didn't know that at the time. We were just going what we thought was the right thing to do. Later on, whenever I started talking about Shaw here, started you know, explaining what this means and stuff like that to me, then you know, it's like, oh, that's what it is. I can understand that concept because we used to do that. It's the same thing. So then we started working on prawn trawlers. So prawns are the opposing season to oysters. At this point, I had started my business doing website development and stuff like that. I don't think I had made the transition to marketing automation or anything like that yet, but we had done that, so I had that going, and had also decided that I was going to live in one place and only travel occasionally, not travel, you know, for half the year or whatever. So said, well, we might as well get a seafood thing going on in the summertime as well. So we started prawn trawling because it's an opposing season. Now, with prawn trawling, you know, don't think deadliest catch, you know, where there's like big, huge waves crashing over the boat and you're out there and it's all like, you know, exciting and stuff like that. You know, think the best fed catch, because you're out there, you're eating well all day. It is hard work, it is, but it's kind of pleasant. It's not really, Forrest Gump kind of got it right-ish, except for the part in the hurricane. That was totally not right. But anyway, there is some danger involved though. So this right here is the winch. This is the piece of machinery that pulls in the nets, holds the nets behind the boat, and pulls them in whenever you're done. You actually adjust these levers and stuff, and then this winds up this big, you know, metal cable that's about that big around, winds it up, and it pulls the nets back up into the boat. Now, this runs off the engine. This particular boat, we're on the Village Lady at this point, has a KTA 1150, so that's a Cummins diesel. engine. It's good for about 400 horsepower, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that much. I don't know how much you're into diesel engines and stuff. It's not that much. But this winch runs on a reduction gear off the engine, so it's 6-to-1. So it's heaps of torque. So it has a lot of power, just not much horsepower. Now, that's not really so important, other than to know that while you're actually working the winch, these cables that go out right here, they're real close to you. And if you wear loose-fitting clothing, then if a burr on one of those cables grabs your clothing or you, it will suck you into that winch, and it will not be pretty. It's not a good thing. Okay, so what you learn, or what 50% of the people in this photo have learned, is that whenever you're working the winch, and it's a little bit cool, so we'd be in springtime right here, you keep your sleeves rolled up and well and truly out of the way, because these levers that they're working on are guiding the winch cables in, and if you have loose-fitting clothing, a burr can catch it, and it'll be done before you can do anything about it. So you do that, right? Makes sense. So whenever I started getting more into project and program management and started learning about risk management, right? So we talk about proactive versus reactive risk management. Managing the bad thing happening before the event happens rather than after. So in terms of working on a prawn trawler, that would be, this is the event, is your shirt getting caught in the thing, on the wire. Managing it proactively would be rolling up your sleeves to make sure that doesn't happen. Managing it reactively would be trying desperately to rip yourself out of there after it happens. Okay? So, started learning about that, and whenever I started, learning about risk management, it's like, oh, that makes sense, it's just like that. Well, why wouldn't you do that? It makes sense, have a bias towards that. Hell yeah, sounds good. So, another thing with prawn trawling that you do, behind a basic shrimp boat or prawn trawler, there's 3 nets. Now there's more advanced configurations, but we'll stick with the basic configuration. There's 3 nets, 2 big ones that go way back, and those are the ones that are catching the majority of your prawns. There's also a smaller net that's up front beside the boat, and that's this guy right here. So these are those cables I was referring to earlier. They're going back to the big nets, which are way behind the boat. This is the much smaller net. It's right here. It's called the tri-net. Now, I used to think the tri-net was TRI, because there's 3 nets. I've worked out since it's TRY, because you're trying to catch something, and you're seeing what you catch. So what you do, your big nets are out the back, and they generally, you have a plan. At the beginning of the day, I'll start at the beginning. At the beginning of the day, you have a plan for where you think there's going to be some prawns. So you drive the boat there, you set your nets out the back, and you see how you go. You pull this every 15 minutes, and you make it count, and you track that count over time. After depending on the count, you might say an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on that, you'll do what's called hauling back, and you'll haul these big nets back up on the boat, dump them out, and sort through it. Now what you're trying to do, well, ultimately you're trying to do this. You're trying to catch a big, huge pile of prawns, right? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. But what it really is it's a Deming cycle. Plan, do, check, act. You're planning what you're going to do for the day. Over here, starting here. You're deciding what it is you'd like to catch. You're going ahead and doing it. You're getting out there. You're putting your nets in the water. You're hauling up your tri-net and checking to see how you go. And then you might change your course or where you have the boat pointed for the rest of your haul. Excuse me. And modify what you do as necessary. So this is agile development right here. This is iterative development. This is the scientific method. It's all right there. So as soon as I started seeing this, it's like, it's like a tri-net. Easy. I know why you do that. So now we're in the land of agile coaching, if you couldn't tell by the post-it notes. We've now made the transition. There should be an intermission or something. So in the land of agile coaching, it's like, a lot of these, this is where, through, introducing different ways of working, modern and contemporary ways of working into organizations, and I had to explain how things work and help teams that I was managing to uncover better ways of working and all these things, and then I got a job as an agile coach, and it was like I won the job lottery. because all of a sudden I had a name for what I actually did all those years. But then the challenge was, wait a minute, why is that? Why do I like it so much? Why do I enjoy it? Why do I find it, not easy, because it's certainly not an easy job, but why do I, how do I do it? What is it exactly that I'm doing? And I started to think about the link between the work that I did on the water and the work that I did as the other side of my career, and how I would always refer back to this, find something that suited the concept so that I could understand it at a deeper level, so that I could then explain it or embed it into others. And I started to explore that, and I started doing research. I went to Google, as you do. I think I avoided Wikipedia, but because it's like, if you can understand how something works and how you're able to do it, then you can start to amplify it and explain it to others. That's what I'm hoping to do tonight. Keen for feedback. So my research took me down this path. So this fellow, Noel Entwistle, he works at the University of Edinburgh. He's he came up with a concept called phenomenology, which is fun to say but kind of hard. It's so the definition of it is there, and why he was doing this, what he was actually doing. He was studying learning, so how people learn, specifically for higher education. So this is back in the late 70s, early 80s. He was doing his work, and he came up with this concept. So how to identify how people are able to take a concept on board and learn it, but not just learn it like be able to repeat it rote, but truly learn it. And what he came up with was what students learn depends on how they learn and why they have to learn. So that's kind of his thesis, I suppose, at the end of it, which was then taken up by another fellow, Anthony Gregork. He's just as pretty as Noel, but I didn't have space on the slide for his photo. But what he did, now he's actually a phenomenological researcher, which is totally a job title I want. So if anybody has an opening out there for a phenomenological researcher, please let me know, I'm keen. What he did is he actually took the work to the next level. And he said, okay, let's kind of codify this some more. And let's and he kind of did that to this, and his work went for years. So he started this in the 60s, and then he found Noel's work in the 70s and added on to it, and then finally about 1984, about that or exactly that, he came up with this. So what he's distilled it down to is that there's two qualities for how we learn. There's our perceptual quality and the ordering ability. Okay. So, perceptual quality, concrete, and abstract. So concrete, based mainly on the senses, the five senses, is what we can see, it is what it is. Abstract is pattern finding, intuition, imagination, more creative. And then ordering ability, which is sequential, everything follows its linear path, or random. Just things all over the place. Yeah? Now, whenever you first read these, we'll all associate with these. Now, this is not a definitive thing. You will be one of these, and that's it. But I guarantee you, whenever everybody in the room was looking at this, you were either hunting and pecking and scanning, not reading them in order, which would mean you like things random. You might have been looking for the example or the thing in quotes and been frustrated that there wasn't quotes down here at the bottom. That would be more concrete. I see people laughing. Yeah, am I right? That's more concrete. You wanted the examples, exactly what it is. You might have been looking at some of this and thinking, I can see how maybe I could use this. That's very abstract. You might have been just scanning and bouncing all over the place, which would be very random. There's nothing wrong with any of that. We all have our bias. But wait, that's not all. These work together. These work together. So you're not just abstract or random. They work together. You put them together. It's a mix and match sort of thing. So you can be concrete, sequential. You can be concrete, random. Abstract, sequential. Abstract, random. They work together. Okay? Now, I'm very much abstract random. So if I were to look at this slide, if I decided to read this slide at all, rather than just listening to the person that was speaking, which is what I actually would do, I would be bouncing all over the place here and thinking about how I could apply it some other way. That's what I would be doing. That's my tendency. And there's nothing wrong with any tendency. There's no right or wrong answer here. We all have one. There's nothing right or wrong with it. And it's not we can move between them for different subject material, or, as we'll learn in a minute here, we can move through them with intent. So, one of the things I learned coaching is that if we can get a person that we're working with, it doesn't have to be a coachee, this can be, I guess it's not even just coaching, it's anytime you're trying to get somebody to understand a new concept and be able to apply it to their work. It doesn't have to be a coach as a job title to do that. If you can get it to the abstract and have them understand the abstract, it's the most sustainable way for somebody to understand. In other words, I can explain to you as an Agile coach how to write a story. I just said as a, so yeah, I'm going to do that. As a person, I want to log in so I can see my thing. Something I can explain that to you. I mean, that's, look, I'm not doing Agile theory tonight, so I don't want to hear if that's a perfect story or not. But I can explain how to write a story in a specific context. And you will then, or a person who's learning that, would then understand that for a certain context. But as soon as some new context came up, it wouldn't apply anymore. It'd be like, oh, where's the sequential? What are the steps? What's step 1, 2, 3? What's, give me the concrete example for it. But if you can get it into the abstract, as a user, for a user of the system, I want to do a certain thing so that I receive some value. If you can get that abstract concept through, then suddenly you can apply that to anything. You can understand the abstract concept. So, what I was actually trying to do as a coach is to move people through to understand the abstract, but I didn't actually have a process for it. So, luckily enough, this kind of makes a continuum. So this continuum, he didn't create a slide quite as pretty as mine. But J.D. Meyer, he's the director of business transformation at Microsoft. He came up with the fact that he thought there was a continuum for this stuff. In 2008, he was not the director for transformation, business transformation there at that time. He was some sort of engineering leader of some variety. But this is what he suggested would be the continuum. And I would love to debate with him or anybody that would take the time which order these two middle ones should be in, or if it even matters, or if you would just cycle between these in an attempt to get to here. I think there's different ways to use this, so don't see this as a linear continuum. But there certainly is a learning journey. And I learned for me that it actually helped me to do my job better whenever I started to use this and to be able to identify where somebody or a team was on this continuum, and then to be able to actually structure a plan to get them through to here. At least with one concept. Not to change them as a person, not to change their fundamental default style. Not for that. It's not about changing who you are, but for a specific concept to get somebody through to where they could actually grok the concept. Is everybody okay with grok? Do you know what that word means? General knowledge. So Stranger in Strange Land, the book, to grok means to understand something so much that it's within your being and you can't imagine the world without it. So great book if you haven't read it. So cool, we came up with that. So what's in it for you? What's in it for a CTO? Or what's in it for a leader of people? So you hear a lot these days about leaders as a coach, and that is very much a thing. It is our job, or actually I'm not a people leader anymore, so it's not my job anymore, it's your job now, to, see what I did there? To grow the people that are working on the teams that you lead. Whether it's hard skills, soft skills, doesn't matter what it is. It can be process, new modern contemporary ways of working. My gig, it can be very hard skills and learning the new piece of technology, whatever it is. Part of our job is to do that, and it's generally recognized now that using coaching techniques
is a successful way of doing that. You also have to realize that everyone has their style, and there's no right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. And that you have yours. You'll have your own default. But then you need to start learning how to adapt your default, how to shift the conversation, how to explain something, how to recognize where somebody is and be able to explain something in a way that they will better understand it, and then construct a learning plan or a learning journey to take them through to where they can abstract it. Personally, so these are a couple things that, I mean, you know, using metaphor and simile, I mean, those things are great. You know, I use those as much as possible to get people to understand things. But the real interesting thing is and this is a path I followed down with this talk originally enough, backed off of it enough, but then last time I threw this dot point in at the last minute. I was like, I'm not willing to give up on it. You ever do that? But so that's this whole work-life balance. And we talk a lot about work-life balance, and I love my work-life balance. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm, you know, and with that balance, we talk a lot about, oh, I take work home sometimes. You know, anybody guilty of taking work home? Anybody? I mean, I'll raise my hands up. But what I'm really keen to explore through this concept is taking life back into work. So what are the things you're passionate about? How can you abstract that stuff back into work? You know, I think there's innovation opportunity there, both in the technology or in how we're working, in the process itself. You know, there's really an opportunity there. So that's a concept I'm keen to, or I am currently exploring with some people. So it's interesting stuff. So here's kind of some things to be aware of. But then how can we amplify it further? You know, what's the next step? So, you know, it's a cool quote I found. You gotta have a quote every slide. So here it is anyway, I'll just move on now. But this actually means a lot to me. So you know, our job, if part of our job as people leaders is to help people learn and grow, you know, we don't just want to fill their head with more and more knowledge. That's not the point. What we want is to light a fire under them, to go out and find their own, to be able to scale this thing, right? That's what we want. That's what it means to be a senior executive. Scalable learning structures underneath you. That's that you empower. So how do we do it? How can we accelerate it even more? So sorry, I saw somebody taking a photo. I'll go back. I'll send these out too. Like you can have the slides. There's some cool links underneath some of those other ones too. There's links to all of this stuff where I found this. So I encourage you to read it from the original as well. So how does this work in conjunction with other thinking models, sense-making models? Is anybody familiar with Kinefin? Have you ever heard of this before? Kinefin? Okay, so a fellow by the name of Dan Snowden. Man, some people that I'm coaching right now, he was down in Canberra recently, and they got to meet him, and they got like a private hour session with him, just because he was interested in what they do. So envious. I said, man, why wasn't I in Canberra that week? Anyway, so what he's come up with here, this is totally his work, is a sense-making model to help understand our environment where we're currently working. So I won't turn this into a talk on Kinefin, but I would encourage you to look for it. But it talks about how work can be simple. So this is very much your concrete sequential work. Okay, it is what it is. You follow step 1, 2, 3. Stuff gets done. It then goes up into your complicated. So this is where cause and effect starts getting not quite as obvious, but you can work it out. You can still work it out. Over into your complex where, you know, you won't really see anything about cause and effect until after you're done, or until after you're through it. So this would be, you know, again, I think in terms of how this relates to the continuum for learning, it's worth thinking about which one goes where. But, you know, concrete random for abstract sequential, you know, those two would go somewhere here. Down to your chaotic, which is where you need to use your complete novel practice, where you're at your creative finest, because there is absolutely, you know, cause equals X times effects divided by Y. You know, I mean, there's no relationship at all. So it's interesting to think about that and how you can use how people learn to help guide teams as we're leading teams to take a problem that might seem chaotic or very complex, and to help guide them to bring it into something that's simple, which, by the way, as technologists, things that are in simple, it's a candidate for automation. Automate it, go find the next hard problem. Yeah? So it's also, we can also use it as learning as a add-on, I suppose, to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect? Again, I'd encourage you to go read about it. I'll always put this up as an American. I love this link anytime I put it up for the Dunning-Kruger effect. So maybe the reason the Dunning-Kruger president, there's an article about it. Anyway. So you can use different learning styles if you recognize that some teams that you're working with, and like we all do it with, for something in our life, we're up here right now. And for me, it's probably guitar playing. I'm definitely up there. I'm awesome. But, we'll be up here for something. But if you recognize that in your teams, it's not a bad thing. It's part of the learning journey. But you can use, potentially, you could use abstraction, or, that use abstract random styles to help them discover for themselves that they're up here, and then help them slide down here to where the real learning journey can start. And this is where it really kind of the rubber hits the road, because as leaders we have a real responsibility to use these things for the powers of good, not the powers of evil. So you can't just say, ha ha, you don't know what you're talking about, good luck. We have to give them a landing pad, yeah? So landing pads are good things like learning journeys. So this is, similar to the continuum we were talking about earlier, but it's also a good one to be aware of. It's the Dreyfus model for skill acquisition. This was originally created in, I think, the early 80s, 82, I believe, for fighter pilots to understand the learning journey that fighter pilots are going. Because that's never we're coming out with our real awesome, war machines or whatever, and people needed to have these specialized skills to use them. So this was the learning journey that they took them on here. It's good to be aware of things like this, because after you fall off the peak of incompetence, or you need to start a sustainable learning journey from there. One of my favorites, more simple, but also works in conjunction with other learning journeys, is Shuhari. Familiar with Shuhari? Yeah. So Shuhari is it comes from Japanese martial arts. I don't know why with Agile. Like, we love to take things from martial arts. Like, I'm not sure why, but I like it too. I don't do martial arts. But Shuhari's learning journey for a set of forms with certain martial arts. So Shu is where you learn the forms, you follow the forms, you do them the same every time. You just repeat. Very sequential, very concrete. Ha is where the rules have become part of what you do. You can't imagine doing things without the rules. Re is then the mastery stage, where you transcend the rules and you're creating your new rules. This is very much in the abstract random. So these things are all relational. You use them together. Because, as one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I wanted to give a different quote try out this time. But one of my favorite quotes of all time is from George Box. He was a statistician in the earlier part of the 20th century. Super interesting guy. If you want to have your mind blown by statistics, which is something that just very basic statistics blows my mind anyway. I'm not much into maths, but his work is stunning. It's well worth looking into. But what he said: all models are wrong, and some are useful. So, like all models, don't take this as the absolute truth, but if there's some use in it, and if you can amplify that use with other models, then go forth and do so. Thank you. This is me. This was my current boat. I just recently sold. Well, no, that's actually my other brother-in-law, not the oysterman. But that was my boat in Australia. Just recently sold it. I'm looking to get a small one. I want a small boat again. Anyway, still out on boats, just not doing it for work anymore. But thank you very much. Any questions? Sorry, I'm like walking. I'm like a wanderer.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
Any questions?
What sort of learning journeys have you taken people on? Can you give a specific example of these foundational journeys that you're talking about?
Yeah. Do you want an example with work, like with as an Agile coach, like what a real learning journey is? Yeah, okay.
Shrimp story.
I
could. Hey, look, we had interns and stuff with that. I could tell you that, but telling somebody how not to get their arm cut off. But like something that's more relatable to work is so as a coach, I use a coaching plan. So this is a way of, and to develop that plan, I have to observe a team first, understand the current state. I have to go do the thing where I had the video and looking at the, so I'm doing Gemba, Jinshinabutsu. Standing there where they're working, observing how they're working, what they're doing, who's talking to who, everything about it. Are they using any agile stuff? Are they not? Is it not at all Scrum, but they're doing stuff like Kanban and stuff like that? Then, I'm observing to understand the current state. Okay. Then I have to understand where they'd like to be. These things can happen in parallel with each other. So what's their goal? Why do they want me there? Why am I there? Where do they want to get to? What I then do is construct their learning journey or their coaching journey. A lot of times it involves training or learning, classroom style. But as a coach, of course, it involves coaching. And I'm not going to work myself out of a job on day one. But so the coaching journey will typically follow. I like to use Shuhari in my coaching plans. Now, what I'm actually playing with now is starting to use this in conjunction with it, because Shuhari is something that a team can follow, whereas the continuum that I had up there, in my opinion, is a more personal thing. So everybody has their learning styles. Teams don't gravitate to one or the other as a team. But as a team, you can, let's say we wanted to uplift how a team's planning. Right now, they're just working with no plan whatsoever. What I would do is I would do the shoe part first. And I would say, okay, we'll get a trainer in, and we'll do some training on how agile planning works. You have to have your roadmaps, you have to have your release plans, you have to have your sprint plan, you have your Kanban board, do the thing. And I will then help a team to incorporate that thing into what they do. So that's very shoe. Okay? We do that for a while. Then at that point, whenever this has just kind of become how it is, at that point we'll do ha with planning. So this is where we start to do the same things. The things are the same. But we start to understand the deeper relationships between each of these plans. We start to really explore the concepts of rolling planning structures. We start to explore things outside of normal planning as a planning event. So in other words, planning itself is incorporated into everything we do. And then the re-stage would be where teams are planning in different and new ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, it's probably a little too much of a wordy answer. The other ones were like, I thought you weren't going to do Agile theory.
I was going to say, good talk.
Thank you.
Continuous learning, I think is what you're emphasising both on your part and on the team's part. And probably failing to plan failing to plan is planning to fail. And the agility in both plans and execution, and indeed learning through that process, I would emphasise as well.
Yeah, that's it's I think especially as leaders, we have to be planning for what we're doing with our teams, the journey we're taking teams on. And it's a huge responsibility, especially as teams grow. I know some CTOs have somewhat small teams. Some CTOs have massive, huge teams, the size of small companies themselves. And it's at any of those levels, at all of those levels, the responsibility stays the same, because you have literally people's careers in your hands, and there's a responsibility to grow people, not just to the people themselves. It also benefits the company, but it's also for you, because as you take people through that learning journey and they start to become abstract, random learners with certain concepts, and they get into that more creative space, they get to that more space, they start to become more comfortable working in complex and chaotic environments. That's when you start to learn from them. So you get it back tenfold. So really, it's a virtuous circle.
So I was wondering what you do when you first join a team, and how you discover the different types of learning styles that exist in a team, and then how do you notice any patterns to teams coming together and the learning styles that may work or be at odds with each other?
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's no tried and true. Here's the 10-step process to do it. So one of the skills interestingly enough, some of the research, if you read it, comes along with being more abstract. Random learners tend to be more empathetic people. So, as with that being my, and I don't know if that's like a hard and fact truth, but it is in some of the research. So, you know, I use empathy to try and really understand where a person is with a concept if they're struggling. A lot of times, where you're going to see it is whenever there's conflict. So, and by conflict I mean healthy conflict. I don't mean a fist fight in the middle of the pod. I mean, you know, that healthy conflict that happens around a whiteboard. You know, where you have. I mean, let me just describe a scenario that I'm sure will be completely unfamiliar to everybody in the room. Let's say you have a couple of architects that are standing around a whiteboard, but haven't actually drawn anything yet, and one of them is just talking about this perfect castle that he has in his mind. Okay, and the other one is talking about the different steps that need to be taken to build the incredibly complex Visio that he has. Yeah, and they're arguing about these two things. Now, they could have the exact same thing in mind, but they're arguing about it. So it's a matter of looking at where they're coming to. And I'm just kind of a random abstract situation, you know, but I'm looking at where they're coming at that conflict from and what they're saying. In other words, the person who's able to talk about the perfect end state that he's imagined is very abstract, but he might be talking about it in a sequential or a random way. The person who has the Visio that's incredibly detailed and wants to talk about step 1, 2, 3 to get there, you know, that's very much that concrete sequential sort of thing. So it's observation. I mean, but generally wherever there's conflict, and if you look at the way a person is approaching the conflict, a lot of times it'll become apparent through using empathy.
Another couple of observations. Leadership is about inspiring people to come forward and take responsibility for something. So if you have a number of people and you can get one person say, yes, I will take that and I will lead these 3 people to do something. Now, that's good. I was just thinking of plans, you know, like the best laid plans of mice and men. And any plan doesn't survive the contact with the enemy. Again, planning is good, but planning has to be supervised and be looked after and be agile to be changed as new observations come in. And then if it involves something bigger than what was envisaged, then the whole thing has to go back and be looked at again in a bigger context.
Yeah, we absolutely have to learn and adapt with plans and stuff like that, no matter what it is, whether it's a learning journey you're taking somebody on or any plan that we have. You know, my plan to get from here to the house, you know, the Victoria Bridge can be closed down like it was the other day. I'll adapt that plan. But I think the more interesting conversation, though, is around the inspiration. So you said you want to inspire people, but the real interesting thing there is how do you inspire? Like, how do you do that? Get up and give a motivational speech? I mean, that's one way. But how do you do it? How do you plan to inspire? How do you put a plan in place to inspire people to want to learn? It's not an easy question to answer. And we need all the tools in our toolkit that we can possibly have to do that, because it's hard.
We were talking about learning journeys of the team and learning journeys of individuals. How do you deal with onboarding someone into the team while the team's halfway through their own transition? Do you kind of pause the progress of the team to get this other person up to speed, or just let them hit the ground running and hope?
Well, maybe not the latter. but you know, the funny thing is there's generally, what I've found in organizations, there's a couple different types of onboarding that happen. There's the official one. A lot of times it's called inductions. Okay. And the last thing it's going to do generally is talk about how to code. It's going to talk about everything but how to code. There's also the team. And that's the one that sometimes happens in a guided format, and sometimes it just happens, but no matter what, it happens. In other words, have you heard of the research? God, I'm going to get this wrong. Where there's a bunch of I guess you did like monkeys or something, which, you know, I'm not condoning doing research with animals here. But they had them all in a room, and a banana came out, and then whenever they went to go get the banana, it sprayed in water. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, and then over time, they started rotating the different monkeys out, and they no longer sprayed the monkeys with water anymore until at the very end. None of the original monkeys had ever been sprayed with water, but as soon as the banana came out, it was, they still wouldn't go for it. It was just a learned thing. So in other words, our cultural onboarding is happening no matter what. So as leaders, we need to be aware of the culture. We have a job to foster the right culture, the culture that we want. As you said, what right is, but to foster the culture that we want, to have a roadmap in place for where that culture, where we'd like to take it. We also need to, in terms of just how to onboard somebody to do something more specific, like writing code. It's good to be aware of the onboarding that's going to happen no matter what, the cultural onboarding, but then to be able to work in the onboarding that we'd like to see as well. But ideally, onboarding, let the team do it.
Normally you would bring somebody on to fill a hole in the team, and the team would have an understanding of what this person comes in to do, and they would be enthusiastic about having him on board because hopefully they've been in the selection process to get that person into the team and so forth. And I've always found it works well.
Sometimes. Sometimes, not always. I've personally, as a people leader, I've had it go both ways. But yeah, generally well.
All right, well, we might call questions there. Please join me in thanking Will.